Hi everyone, welcome to session 4 of Unconvention. For the next session, we have with us Mr. Arun Venkatesan, co-founder and CEO Willgrow USA, who will be moderating a panel discussion on how hospitals are adopting entrepreneurs' innovation within their ecosystem. Before handing over to Arun, I would like to take a moment to introduce Bionest to the audience today. Bionest MSMF is an initiative by Narayana Health, Mazumdar Shaw Medical Foundation, and Willgrow. It is India's first corporate hospital-based startup incubator, and Bionest aims to build a health tech startup ecosystem in India. Startups that are part of Bionest get access to state-of-art infrastructure, network of hospitals across NH chain, clinical services and expertise, mentoring, industry connections, among all other incubation services that we provide. So with this, over to you, Arun.
Thank you, Anusha. As Anusha said, my name is Arun Venkatesan. I've been with Willgrow for many years now. I was leading the health portfolio in India, moved to the US and co-founded, and I'm now functioning as CEO of Willgrow USA. So we are interested in propagating this Willgrow network as a global network of social enterprise entrepreneur incubators, and that's our main focus area. So if you're an impact incubator operating in this ecosystem globally or anywhere of interest, please reach out to us. We'd like to open our network to you and help you in your effort. As Anusha mentioned, this is a very unique program, a program that's very close to my heart. The corporate hospital-based incubator. Dr. Paul Salins, who is a panel member today, has been instrumental in sort of thinking this through, and together we started this initiative, which is now actually has Bionest status from BIRAC and is operating well. So today we were focusing on a particular issue that's a very great interest to entrepreneurs as well as other players in the ecosystem, which is basically how can hospitals adopt entrepreneurs' innovations into their ecosystem. We decided to call this as their ecosystem because we've realized that the hospital incubator or the hospital adoption base is something that's very important in encouraging, in cultivating these innovations with the entrepreneurs. We'll get into this a little bit during the panel. With me today, as I said, I'm very happy and thrilled to have Dr. Paul Salins. He's a managing director and vice president of the Mazumdar Shaw Cancer Center, Narayana Hrudayalaya Multi-Specialty Hospital. He's an internationally acclaimed authority in cranio-maxillofacial surgery. He's a visionary. He established MSMF. He had quite a bit of input into the structuring so that it works as it does today. As he said, I had the privilege of working with him and his team in forming the joint Bionest that I'm sure talked about. Look us up. It's a unique hospital-based incubator for healthcare innovation. Also joining me now are two entrepreneurs to represent the other side of the ecosystem. Ayush Rai is co-founder of Inito. Inito is the world's first comprehensive at-home diagnostic device. This allows diagnostic tests for many things like fertility, for diabetes, thyroid, etc., on a single device connected to a smartphone. Inito is a great success story. It's backed by Y Combinator, many other investors in India, US, and Singapore. Also representing the entrepreneur side of things is Abhishek Sen. Abhishek is now more of a colleague, more of a friend, but formally introducing him would be to say that he's co-founder of Biosense Technologies, another affordable diagnostic device platform. It's one of the success stories of Willgrow in medtech. I think I'm happy to say that. He's recently gone through an acquisition and so on. The good thing about Abhishek is that Abhishek has trained as a physician, started working as a physician, realized that gaps in the ecosystem where he could be of use and create an impact, co-founded a company and has now successfully selling products and making an impact on in the ecosystem. Also joining us shortly would be Mr. George Alex, who is the CEO of Jaslok Hospital and Research Center in Mumbai. For many years, he was with Fortis Healthcare before that for about 3 years. So we'll wait for him to join into the panel shortly. Okay, so the context I think I set up for this discussion is that the hospital sales is an important part of the entrepreneur's journey, whether impact or not. And so we would like to really dive deeper into the dynamics of that, get your perspectives so that the entrepreneurs listening in can benefit from this insight and from this experience, right? The first question I just wanted to throw open, I think we would start with the entrepreneurs and then go on to Dr. Paul, is the burning question on everyone's head. We would like to really hear about what the pandemic's impact has been on hospital sales, clinic sales, or institutional sales in the context that applies to you. And what is the outlook for this year? So let's start with Ayush. Can we start with you, please?
Yeah. So, thanks, Arun. I'll give you both sides of the question. So we are a home product, right? And by and large, we are B2C. So I have that perspective as well as, a lot of my friends and people in the ecosystem who have been selling to hospitals, right? So I think during the pandemic, of course, the revenue of everyone dropped. I mean, the hospital footfall, fell down drastically, and that's why a lot of POs of a lot of people got cancelled, orders were not taken in. But also, I think the bigger impact was around a lot of payments got delayed for a lot of people, right, from the hospital sides. And, I think there are many examples where actually, companies had to shut down because of the cash flow issues due to the pandemic. However, who was selling directly to the consumers, people like us were actually pretty positively impacted because, healthcare is such that pandemic or, come what may go, people still need to access care. So everything that allowed healthcare to be consumed remotely without stepping out basically saw a massive fold increase. But wherever you were relying on payments from hospitals, right, or hospitals buying stuff for their use, that got very badly affected. And to give you specific examples, for us, our cost of customer acquisition from a B2C perspective basically became half during the pandemic, right? But IVF clinics basically saw like a huge slump in footfall, and that is why the associated, device companies, the software providers, etc., everybody sort of revenue got hit down. People are back to pre-pandemic levels right now in most cases, because I mean they will have to get there. But I think the middle 6 months was a huge cash flow problem for everyone.
Excellent. Abhishek, do you want to go next?
Sure, Arun. Thank you. So we are largely B2B. So we sell to hospital clinics and other stakeholders in the ecosystem. Within hospitals, starting March 22, 2020, I think we can divide it into two kinds. One who were catering to COVID patients, and ones who were not. The ones who were not, the number of elective surgeries, OPDs, etc., plummeted to a large extent. And in and around November, December, we saw a hit of about between 35 to 40% of the similar of the similar period in the year before the pandemic. Of course, the sale of COVID related products, right, from viral transport mediums, RNA extractions, RT-PCRs, even a specific biochemistry or immunoturbidity tests like CRP, IL-8, these went through the roof. So to a large extent, they compensated. But on the non-COVID side of things, November, December was about a 30 to 40% hit for most companies. I still have my fingers crossed to say that we are at pre-pandemic levels. I think we are probably at minus 10%, minus 10 to minus 15% as we speak, but we'll know more when the month closes, I guess. So that has essentially been the impact from a revenue standpoint. People who have been able to make a switch to making COVID products were in some ways able to offset the losses that came in and also maintain cash flows, because early in the pandemic, there was no cash for non-COVID products, but there was a lot of cash for COVID products because supply was limited. That changed in October, in between the period of October to December, because exports are still restricted. So I think we're getting there back on our feet, Arun, on the non-COVID side of things, but just about.
Excellent. So that sets this up nicely for Dr. Paul. Dr. Paul, what is the outlook of sales or hospital procurement? How did this change during the pandemic? What were your priorities? What trends did you see? A lot of entrepreneurs are listening in, and I think it will benefit them a lot to sort of understand this and react to this.
The hospital situation was, this COVID-19 situation was not something that could be planned for or was anticipated. It really was completely a shock to the system. And I think the past 1 year's great lesson is it has been a learning experience, certainly in the past 6 months. How do we manage the COVID situation and get back our economy of the hospitals? So much of the perturbation that was caused in the whole thing about payments and everything, in part was because the understanding how best we cope with COVID patients and the fear with other patients who wanted to come to the hospital but were afraid to come caused a lot of disturbance. And also to integrate both COVID care and non-COVID care was at that particular point in time was extremely difficult. Large institutions such as ours, which has a huge ecosystem, could manage it because we have space and we have different areas where we could locate the COVID patients and organize ourselves in such a way that we could put. But then there was the huge issue about how do we really safeguard the doctors. And in fact, all the 4 assistants I had, my fellows, all the 4 became COVID positive. So it was a tremendous stress on the system. What I can say is that we are learning now. I think this has been a very good process of understanding how best. So any future eventuality probably would be less economically impacting to the same degree. Probably it will not do to the same degree, and we'll find different means. But also it opened up a number of new avenues which we thought we had not explored. How do we actually provide care from at a distance, and how do we cope with patients? In fact, many of the departments, except the surgical units, could easily translate into a remote networking capability. And in a sense, I feel that this is opening up entirely new worlds for entrepreneurial development, because now instead of the patients coming to the hospital, large number of patients would benefit from the hospital going to the patients. So there's a change in the system.
So excellent. I think I want to touch upon that point and sort of refocus around one of the main topics of this panel, which is basically innovation adoption of the hospital ecosystem. So Dr. Paul, I wanted to just quickly follow up by asking you, have we seen an increased appetite for adopting new technologies or new innovations among the hospitals? Has this pandemic changed this mindset, or at least influenced it a little bit? Have you seen this happening? If you can maybe talk about a little bit about general trends or a specific example illustrating that, that will be very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there has been a greater interest in people adopting technologies which is COVID specific. But if you ask me, fundamentally has this attitude about creating physician supportive devices within the hospital system, and whether there has been a change in the way the whole science of entrepreneurial development of medical technology has undergone a shift to cope with the challenges we are going to face in the future. Has that occurred? Have we found something entirely exciting new, where we are going from physician mimicry with artificial intelligence to a sort of a physician substitution? Has not yet occurred.
Correct. So I don't think that will ever happen. I mean, I think the human element will still be there. Humans will still want humans to take care of them when it comes to health. But
I thought
think
I would provoke you, Arun. Yes.
no, that's great. That's great. Actually, I think it's a question that's burning in innovators' minds, that have we actually made this AI and all that. Let's come back to that and actually discuss this. So going in reverse order now, Abhishek. So what is your experience? I know you have pivoted your business model, your product offering too, quite a bit, partly due to survival. But I think from that context, right, do you think there is increased appetite for innovations being adopted into this hospital ecosystem?
So, Arun, one big thing that we saw was physicians who are now willing to consult over phone. And it's honestly, it's not like there's another choice. There wasn't a choice for 4 to 6 months. And you could see a bunch of physicians, diabetologists, especially the consulting physicians, not the surgeons so much. But the consulting physicians, a lot of them actually took to remote consultations, virtual consultations. And telehealth has been around for a while. But I think the pandemic was really a big boost to the entire virtual consultation business. And of course, when you link it with connected devices like ours, we are essentially tools which enable that process to function smoothly. Now, I just hope that that behavior change wasn't temporary, and at least a part of it continues both on the provider side and the patient side, because the patient also has to pay the physician, if not in full, at least a percentage of what he or she would pay in an in-person visit. And that makes the system sustainable. So while there has been a forced behavior change for 6 months, we have to see whether parts of it remain as we move ahead. If it does, which I hope it will, then there's a lot of then a new market has opened for, say, digital health technologies, diagnostic devices like ours.
Excellent. So Ayush, that brings me to you. What do you regard? What do you think is the change or the current state of appetite for innovations in this medtech hospital ecosystem? I mean, you've been trying to sort of do this remote diagnostics. That's been the core of your innovation. I'm sure you saw interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I'll try to be as honest as possible. We always believe that home is going to be the future, and we knew it's going to take a long time for everyone's adoption. And a part of what home care really does, it's really efficient for the patient, but not as efficient for a doctor. I mean, because for a doctor, the value created for the user is a lot more, right? Unless an event like COVID happens where you cannot do anything about it, right? So when we started out, we tried going B2B, right? And to be honest, it was really miserable. We couldn't. I mean, right now, I think we sold like in a month we would sell the number of units we sell while we are in this call, we would sell in a month. right? Going B2B, because and there's a good reason to it, right? Because our product, which is allowing people to test their fertility hormones remotely, etc., fundamentally benefits consumers, right? And it's not so great for the physicians. The economics don't work for them that way, right? So, and I think it's our mistake that we tried selling through doctors. We shouldn't have, right? But however, I think this will stay for a lot of conditions, right? That you will have to, that this a remote care will happen only when there's forced behavior. It happens for glucometers because the frequency of testing is so much that there is no other alternative, right? But for other things, it does not happen because the frequency is not that high, right? So you can get a person to a clinic once a week for a test if required, right? And also, I think as a country, uh, labor is cheap, which means that getting someone to collect your sample, even if it required once a week, is okay, right? uh, but so I think so my perspective is that uh, yes, it has changed. Post pandemic, we are getting interest from the hospital ecosystem almost every day. But I think fundamentally I believe that fundamentally the economics does not tie well for the hospital ecosystem, right? It is great for the consumers, at least for our space, but not so great for doctors in India, because for whatever home device you keep, you still have somebody who can send a guy to your place and actually collect a sample for infrequent things. So in India, it will happen only for things which need very frequent monitoring, right? Uh,
Got it.
However, we are seeing a very opposite response outside India. Uh, so, in India, that's why we did consumer. Consumer does very well. We are the number one in our category. Across India, we have sold in 500 plus towns and cities in India. But we also realize this, that, if you want to go to the big game and you want to build billions of dollars, you have to go outside India for remote healthcare, right? So that's why we very early in the journey, we got through the US FDA, right? And we are now launching in the US, but the response is very opposite, because people are not trying to save costs there. What people are trying to save is uh, trips to the hospital and missed work, because the value of time is a lot more there. And there you can't just send someone home, because sending someone home for even a diabetes test, just sending cost is like $50. So it makes a lot more sense to buy a device. So I think, so to summarize, I think my perspective is, yes, it creates a lot of value for patients, but it does not create symmetrical value for the physician, because the hospital system is essentially driven by physicians, because there is a fundamental short in supply and demand, right? So
Got it.
it will be challenging unless it is forced by either science or an external event like COVID.
So I want to refocus this discussion a little bit, starting again with you, Ayush.
Yeah.
So we highlighted a couple of nice points. We've been talking about economy as a driving force for innovations, right? Of the economy of treatment, economy, the cost of operating a hospital, cost of delivering healthcare to the patient. But there is also the ability to guarantee outcomes, which is the main driving force for the hospital, for the physician,
Yeah.
the hospital in general. Somebody like Dr. Paul, who's actually managing both, right? Delivering.
Yeah.
So the ability to guarantee outcomes versus the ability to lower cost to patient, right? And Abhishek and you, Ayush, are sort of in the middle, and so is the Narayana Health, the MSMF ecosystem, so that they also are balancing this.
Yeah.
So in this new layout of the ecosystem, where do you see gaps exist for, or opportunities exist for innovators, right? So you are bridging this gap, between patient and care provider with a diagnostic device, and then from the point of view of cost and ability to guarantee outcome, where are opportunities for innovation?
Yeah, got it. So I think where we see the primary this thing is that of course, it is not going to happen for critical care because, like you said, it's a responsibility of the physician and the doctor to also ensure that to basically balance the risk versus benefits, right? For anything. So it is, so the opportunities, I think, for a remote kind of setup or a tele or a tech kind of driven setups are where for non-critical care, or long-term monitoring or chronic conditions, etc. So I think that's an opportunity, or you're building something that improves the productivity of the physician in the hospitals. I think broadly we see like these two as the major points, right? And we focus on the remote side of it. So I think the real opportunity lies in the non-chronic things, non-critical things, and also, telehealth is a solved problem. Like everybody is doing teleconsultations. It is not a problem anymore. Medication delivery is also not a problem anymore. I think whoever bridges the gap in getting physician to but then if you're doing a teleconsult, you don't really have your hands on the patient, you don't really have test data, right? So at the end of the day, physician is relying on some information about the patient, whether it's like physical or ability to use a stethoscope or getting diagnostic markers, right? So the only way you are going to be able to get closer to the hospital level quality of care delivered remotely is by giving the tools, whether through the doctor or directly consumer, that get the physician enough data to give a correct diagnosis or a treatment, right? And to put it in simple words, most people don't change their thyroid medication for years, but at the end of the day, the physician, if you actually want a new prescription, they will want to get a test because they want to make sure that your levels are still okay, right? So now
that's good actually. So, sorry to interrupt you. So I think that you make an excellent point. So I just want to shift the discussion to Abhishek and get his perspective on this. We're running out of time. So, where do you think the gaps are or the opportunities are, Abhishek?
Around 2 points. One is, of course, getting more data to the physicians, as Ayush said. But being a physician, I know how tough that mindset can be for a physician. That will happen over a period of time. That is my sense. The immediate opportunity to all medtech entrepreneurs is in molecular diagnostics, because before the pandemic, you hardly had few hundred centers who could run a RT-PCR test. Now there are probably 2,500 centers for who have the capabilities for RT-PCR testing. That is sample collection, nucleic acid extraction, and detection. After the COVID demand goes out, the capex and the ability will still be there. So there will be a upstick in infectious disease, nucleic acid testing, some specific mutations testing. That is an immediate actionable opportunity for all of us in the ecosystem to actually get in. The behavior change of physicians, I don't know. I'm looking at it very, very closely. I hope it stays. I'm not sure that it will, but the 2,500 centers that are doing RT-PCR and are growing, the numbers are still growing. They will be here to stay irreversibly. So that's an immediate opportunity that I see.
Excellent. Thanks, Abhishek. Dr. Paul, so the same question to you. So where do you see the gaps are in the ecosystem, and consequently, opportunities for innovators to participate in this, right? To sort of pitch in this.
See, I think what is really happening, the chronic diseases are on the increase, although we have COVID, which has really come up and disrupted the situation. Speaking about physician attitudes and the changing of the sort of practice of medicine, we have not yet arrived at a level of sophistication in diagnostics where a mechanistic approach, where you do a certain test and you have a definitive understanding, we have not yet reached that level. And although we speak about telecommunication, the interrelation between a physician and a doctor, as I pointed, as you rightly pointed out, Arun, is not possible without the patient really getting into a setup. And as soon as a patient comes into a hospital where every possible investigation is open to him, it more or less matches the expectation of the patients also. Now, I would say that there are a lot of chronic disorders where you feel a very high level of almost a mechanistic sophistication in arriving at solutions like diabetes and a number of other conditions, even aging, degenerative brain disorders. There are a number of cases where, although we have number of technologies, for instance, our hospital adopts a very good system for diabetes follow-up. Now, although these things do exist, they have not been completely leveraged to a point where there is a sense of physician-patient interaction. That's very, very important. Secondly, cancer care, again. Now, I really feel that there is a number of the amount of time a patient is made to spend in a hospital environment is partly because we are not so confident of the home care situation where we can monitor the patient to the same degree that is possible within the hospital. Now, I think there is an opportunity certainly in home care where we can offload the time a patient spends within the hospital to the home or to the community. And that requires, I think, a little bit more sophisticated ways in which when a need is there, we are able to deploy a particular system within homes or communities or other area they can take responsibility where there is a direct connection between the hospital and which continues, and some way in which the economics also becomes beneficial to the hospital. It is not because the hospital systems invest a lot in providing very sophisticated investigations. And the idea is to contract the time and provide greater level of specificity. And that actually fits in with the patient's expectations. I think there is a good niche where we create a better interaction between in our telecommunication portals to provide a experience that is almost an experience of being with the physician. I think a lot of people are looking at it, and it is a possibility. Secondly, investigations. Although we speak about molecular level diagnostics, as chronic disorders related to lifestyle disorders comes, I think we are set for a completely new generation of diagnostics. It does not look at the endpoint diagnostics of something where a disruption has gone to a point of disease, but where the progression can be captured. I think that is, again, a very, very important. Thirdly, I think when pandemics or something like that, which probably will be a recurring phenomenon, our capacity to distance ourselves from the hospital without losing out on the care of chronic disorders and even acute disorders which require surgical care, I think some sort of a mechanism has to be developed. I don't think still we have absolute clarity. Tomorrow, let us have this outbreak goes on. How do we operate in this particular situation? Do we have the technologies? We still don't have.
So we're still in execution firefoot fighting mode. We've not actually taken a step back and done strategic planning, is what you're saying. I think I agree. I think this has been a favorite discussion of ours for a long time, many, many years, of progression monitoring and diagnostics tailored to that, as opposed to endpoint diagnostics, which the entire industry and ecosystem is focused on. So this is actually a very, very good point. Mr. George Alex has also joined us. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, please keep your camera on.
First of all, let me apologize to the panel as well as the cyber participants. There was a situation because of which I couldn't join. So my apologies.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We've already actually introduced you and all that. So we are discussing and getting into this question about basically how can we tap into this innovation, right? So how can entrepreneurs make innovations more amenable for adoption in hospitals, and how can hospitals sort of make this a little better so that this can get into this? And we were discussing this opportunity area of lowering cost of treatment versus the ability to guarantee outcomes. So we talked about in the pandemic context, and we've actually moved on to this broader context of post-pandemic, what can we do? So George, the question to you is, what is your experience? What are your thoughts on where the opportunity areas are for innovators as well as hospitals? Now that we have gone through this pandemic experience, in actually adopting or creating innovations, right? Which are the areas you think, from an operations perspective, from the hospital's perspective, where are the opportunity areas?
So I would say there are sea of opportunities. If you really look at as a hospital, we all know, but I'll go to the root cause of the problem. We, as all the administrators would agree, hospital is a low EBITDA business, right? So when it comes to adding costs, which will make it more efficient, or which will ease the way of doing things, may not be easily adopted in a hospital. People only look at two items. Will the technology what we are employing will help us to generate more revenue, or will it help us to reduce costs? These are only two things where people invest in technology. Now it's time that efficiencies also needs to be looked at, because obviously that in some ways is a cost, right? So what I have seen, the adoption to technology or to solutions coming from entrepreneurs who are coming with innovative solutions is not because the perspective of what the solution can deliver, and some of these solutions which come up, it takes time to you see the returns on the investment you're making, and the mid-level manager who's sitting out there, who would be sold to the idea, is one, not able to sell it internally to the top management, who are very wary about why you are incurring that cost. Second, also when it comes to seeing the returns, the mid-level manager only thinks about his tenure in the organization, which in a case is not more than 2 to 3 years. So if you have such a short-sighted approach towards bringing in technology, you would never see returns, and that's why it's not adopted in the hospital setup. So I think what I feel is entrepreneurs also need to break two things here. One, apart from meeting the probably the when it comes to technology, they meet the CIOs to tell them about the technology. It is also important to meet the user department, because when you look at the user department, then you actually get an advocate within the system who would see the benefit coming out of the technology, and they would definitely fight that case well within the system to probably ensure that the technology is employed. So there are many areas, as the question which you had asked, which are those areas, if I can tell you, there are multiple areas in which technology or solutions coming in from entrepreneurs can help. I would, we have also employed, or rather we have also encouraged few entrepreneurs who have, worked and have, in the last 8-9 months, just to take an example of contact tracing. We all know about the 3 T's when it comes to fighting COVID. Contact tracing was a big problem, and when we were seeing that it had spread in the community, the only way you could do is if you can pick up early and then isolate them and try and give them treatment. Now within the system we have like 2,500 people working in our hospital. Now how do you track them? And it's a vertical structure, a 20-story building. How do you track who's met whom and how much time they have spent? What was the exposure level? Were they with mask while they were talking or interacting? So all those. So we have a solution now where we can track each and every employee. We can actually look at how many minutes. So there is a team which is the containment team, who looks at how much time an employee has spent with the other employee, and whether with the mask or without the mask. There are these small tags. I can show them. Even I have those tags. So this has a low emitting Bluetooth device along with an accelerometer, which tells me how much time I've spent on which floor with whom. So all these things. So I think there are multiple areas. Coming back to the question, multiple areas where there is so the problem exists in all hospitals. Solution to all of them. Some of it can come from tech. Some of it can come from some other product or solution which can be brought by the entrepreneurs. I would suggest that we should encourage them, because as I said, the initial problem of low EBITDA. So some of the new solutions coming in will be cost effective. That's what our expectation is. So if it is so, I don't see any reason why it should not be employed.
Excellent. Thank you for that, George. So Wilgrow, as an organization, and all of us here are always interested in impact. We always look at impact to beneficiaries, but there's also impact to entrepreneurs and impact to the care providers and hospital systems that we need to keep in mind to be successful. So I'm going to shift the focus there. We have about 10 minutes or so for question and answers. We're sort of into the question session. And I have a few questions that have come up. So I'm going to ask the hospital questions to entrepreneurs and the entrepreneur questions to the hospitals. That way we get to the meat of the issue real quick. So there is a great question, which is basically how do you reduce the reputation risk to hospitals in adopting new innovations? So I'm going to put this to the entrepreneurs. Ayush, you're on the hot seat first. What have you done and what do you think entrepreneurs should do to reduce this reputation risk, right? That is always, as I said, guaranteeing outcome. And that guaranteeing outcome is for the care provider and for the hospital itself is the reputation risk. How can entrepreneurs de-risk that? How can they mitigate that right off the bat so that it gets... The easy answer is regulatory approvals, but there's a lot more than that. And I'd like you to take a minute or so to answer this, please.
Yeah, so regulatory approvals I think is mandatory to do something, but it's not sufficient, right? So, for example, we just got our FDA clearance for fertility tests, right? But then to actually demonstrate, I'll tell you what we do is when we start off for a few, because we are home, right? So we are not going to deploy one solution. It's like for every patient, but we tell the hospitals to take a bunch of units and try it out at no cost, but they do whatever they are doing as well as our tests simultaneously, right? Because what they are really looking at, so, while you have all the trial data, while you have all the regulatory approvals, but what they want to really see that in their workflow, in their context, how does it look? So I think the simplest what we have found is they do what they are doing, so the quality of care is maintained, but in a shadow fashion, deploy our solution as also, right? So if they are going to do a blood test, they take a little more blood and then basically put it in our device versus their own segment, right? And this is not just in trials, right? In terms of their regular care, and see the comparison, and that expectation also they make it clear to the patient, right? So that just reduces the risk, because a trial, does not always necessarily represent how their users are going to use it and how the doctors are going to consume that information. So I think that has worked, and doctors readily agree for that.
Excellent. Abhishek, same question to you.
Arun,
What have
as you
you
said,
done? What should entrepreneurs do?
as you said, I'll not talk about the regulatory piece. That's one. It's mandatory that you get your CDSCO piece in place when you're selling in India, and of course your CE-IVD in Europe and US FDA in US. But I think what we do is it's important to find the initial 10 customers, and a piece of whenever there's a new product that is made, the people making it, probably the founder of the startup, should actually sell the first 10 units himself or herself. And what it also means is that you have to talk with your early adopters much before the product comes out, right at the design input stage. And you have to ensure that you keep interacting with them till the product comes out. It does two things. One, it gives you a higher probability of a check being on the table when you've finally made the product. That is one. Second is for the first 10 people, because you've really taken their input in their workflows, their insight into their daily practice and distilled it into the design of the product. It is really their product. So you have your early adopters, your first 10 people sorted in the design process itself. And then hopefully if the product works, they tell 10 of their friends and you give them a discount, and that's how you get the ball rolling. But it's important to not design in silos. What I have seen is that engineers speak a different language which doctors don't understand, and sometimes vice versa.
Excellent.
So you have to spend time, give that extra effort to bridge it.
So there's another question, which is actually entrepreneur question, which I'm going to put to the hospital representative. So Dr. Paul, I think you're best suited to answer this question. There's a question that asks if there can be sandbox kind of models provided by hospitals so that the innovators can sort of develop their innovations. In fact, this is one of our questions too. I would say a lot of rural innovators who are interested in this. We have done this in this tri-party incubator that we have established. But the concept, I think, is interesting, right? There are different pulls. What are your thoughts on this, right? What is the barrier, or how can hospitals provide sort of a test bed for checking out innovation, so that I know we've talked about adopting innovations quite rapidly, but can you please speak a little bit to that question?
See, one of the reasons, as you know, we started first, our hospital, we started with the translational research wing. And also, this is the function of Mazumdar Shaw Foundation. We created an entrepreneurial and outreach program so that we recognize certain things which require a different sort of technology which can be part of our outreach mission. Then we provided a molecular research facility, very advanced one, so that anybody could do molecular development, end-stage development, diagnostics to a level, particularly in oncology and inflammatory disease stage, which was possible. Now, one of the reasons what we have done in creating a BioNest within the hospital is that as soon as an innovation comes, we actually link them with different departments. In fact, they work with doctors. What is our hope is that two things will happen. The innovation will be sort of integrated with the thinking process of the doctors in such a way that the doctors will tell the management, this is the way we can actually do the diagnosis. That has happened. In fact, we had one company which was coming with artificial intelligence for cough analytics. And our doctors actually expanded the scope of this into other diagnostic capabilities, which works better in our system because we have a larger number of patients which can be accessed, or there is some ease of doing it. And I think the greatest advantage of embedding a technology development within a structure is it provides opportunities which are low-hanging fruits where we can actually take it quickly to a clinical validation platform rather than going for something which the hospital cannot immediately accommodate. As George Alex was telling, there is a little difficulty with regard to the economies and the investment patterning of our hospitals that has to be overcome. That is why we are hoping that this integrating them as part of the departmental structure of the clinical modules would help us give them that opportunity.
Excellent.
That's what we are experimenting.
Very good. I think that brings a lot of perspective for the entrepreneurs listening in. So, George, the question to you, I think I'll defer that third question, burning question to you is, we have seen, right, that early hands-on engagement of mentors with these innovators is extremely effective. In fact, one of the success elements of the Wilgrow model. But like you just said, right, a typical hot, proactive innovator in a hospital might be looking at it from a 2 to 3 year perspective, which doesn't help the innovator. But how can hospitals change the mindset, or at least support innovations by engaging mentors with these innovators, right? Which is very important. Dr. Paul just touched upon that. The environment is one thing, but the people make a big difference. So what are your thoughts on that? I'd like to hear a perspective on how can we provide or leverage medical experts and innovators in the ecosystem, in the hospital, to help our innovators who are trying to bring about this change.
Yeah. So as Paul said, that they have doctors giving insights. One of the major reasons of these insights coming in from the doctors are because there is nothing called market research when it comes to healthcare and hospital, right? Whether it is primary, some of it is secondary, and the secondary research comes only from the doctors. So when you're talking to the doctor, he actually knows the problem. He knows the problem in his practice. He knows what is missing, what are the gaps. At the same time, he also is privy to what is the patient expecting, which is the most important part. So having a doctor who has, who's bought into the whole, innovation game in the hospital, if he or she is interested in probably bringing about a change in the form of a new technology, or trying to, encourage research, help the, innovator to probably push in, because, when you have that kind of a buy-in, innovator also feels confident. As you said, mentoring is one part of it. When you see a potential, a client who's working alongside with you to ensure that whatever you are trying to build is built for for him and for his needs. So if that happens, definitely that environment helps the innovator to, probably develop what actually is the vision of the team. At the same time, also there is early adoption. So there is no two, ways about it. That's yes. And it's also time that hospitals also, probably welcome the innovators with open arms, because I think when we think of innovators, we only think about, okay, they have a solution, one solution which may fit all, which is not the case. Every hospital, we are a standalone hospital, an iconic, hospital for the last 47 years. We don't have branches, but there are multiple hospitals within the same city who have different set of problems, right? They are looking at different problems. So one solution, if you try to, push to all the 4 units or 5 units in the same city, may not work, because every hospital has a different set of challenge. So if you have within the system support and mentorship to the innovators, I'm sure innovators will come up with new and improved products and services.
Excellent. So we have about 5-7 minutes left in our discussion. I think the questions have petered down. So brings me to my favorite part of any panel discussion, what I call the hot seat questions. I'd like to request each one of you to answer this within 30 seconds to a minute. So since the most familiar person with this format is Abhishek, I'll post this to him. Abhishek, we talked about a lot of things about cost and all that, but the key thing that the entrepreneur is waking up in the middle of the night thinking about is the check on the table, right? And the check on the table, on his table, is directly dependent on the check on the hospital or the doctor's table. So how do you balance this, right? What is the winning formula, right, in your opinion, that ensures that there is revenue for the hospital through your innovation and revenue for you? What are success factors that in your practice?
So Arun, we just look at one thing. It has to make money for the physician or the hospital. If it makes money for the hospital, if it gets embedded in their workflow, we'll make money. So that the second part is actually the easier part. The first part is, how do you understand the workflows of the hospital and the patient expectations to ensure that whatever value you are adding or whatever value your product is adding, there's a patient willing to pay a premium for that extra thing. I think understanding that is absolutely critical. There is no point in forcing an innovation down a customer's throat, and it won't. There might be few takers, but then eventually the system will push back. So every innovation has to, as George said, either add to the top line or add to the bottom line of a hospital. And there's no way around it. It just is that way.
Wonderful. So Ayush, the next hot seat question for you. So Dr. Paul and all of us actually have touched upon this fact that the doctor-patient interaction has to be rich, whereas you here are trying to do as much remote and home-based as possible. So how do you account for that? What is your thought? What is going to be your innovation to enrich doctor-patient interaction so that this gap, the touchy-feely aspect of delivering healthcare, is maintained?
Okay, so I think one thing is extremely clear, that we are not there, like Dr. Paul said, that a person walks in and, hey, I have a headache, tell me what's wrong. And you have to do a battery of things to figure even a simple thing, right? That we will not be there yet for the next 5-7 years, right? So today you have to focus on things that are well understood, like an algorithm, right? Renewing your thyroid medication, renewing your diabetes, your fertility hormone testing. So you have to work on these areas where the variables are lesser, right? And you can take a few things and solve for that, and you don't need everything else. We are not there yet for the next 5 years for complicated things, but the fact is that these things account still for a huge amount of consumer issues, right? So that is why we focus on those things. Wherever possible, go direct to consumer. uh, I mean, we all have to accept that, hospitals have a lot more considerations. So wherever direct to consumer is possible, go direct to consumer. So our sweet spot is basically simple things which have less variables, so that it's much easier and less complicated to diagnose remotely, and something where access is faster, because direct to consumer, you get feedback faster.
Excellent. So, George, question to you. The question is, we talked a lot about the efficiency of operation, but underlying everything is impact to the beneficiary, right? Impact to the beneficiary at the end of the chain, which is the patient. It can be a patient with a lot of payment potential, or a rural patient who has very little potential to pay. How does a hospital ensure that the spectrum of payment potentials and the spectrum of requirements for impact are met?
I don't know whether I've understood your question well, because there was a little snag in the network. What I feel is, you don't categorize patient that way. You, based on the payment potential, you would not look at, because a patient is a patient. When it comes to a doctor in his practice, he would never view a patient as from a particular corporate or a particular from a scheme, and would be paying less. You have to consider that you have to provide the same level of treatment, when the same level of experience, same level of time with the doctor or the hospital has to spend for the patient. Because the moment you try to differentiate that, right, for your
I
gain,
got it.
right?
Got it.
Yeah. So
Sorry, I have to cut you off. We only have a minute remaining, and I want Dr. Paul to have an opportunity to answer. Dr. Paul, the same question to you. How do we ensure in all this moving pieces and all that, how do we balance and make sure we deliver impact to the end beneficiary?
I think one has to consider in modern medicine that there is a degree of extra. An example is, because we are providing super specialty care, there is a cost structure which gets escalated, because somebody comes with a stomach ache today, goes to a gastroenterologist, while he should be treated by a physician. I think that is a very distinct necessity for us to actually bring back the concept of a general practitioner, general surgeon, because what has happened is we have become so specialized that we have become fragmented. I think the future where the technology will be linked would be where we empower the general practitioners and empower the general surgeons to do something which is really important.
Excellent. I think we're out of time, so I want to really take the opportunity to thank everybody who was part of this. I think our moderator wants to our coordinator wants to take a couple of seconds and thank everyone and wind this up. I just want to say we touched upon many issues, new concepts like monitoring progression of disease, ensuring cost effectiveness for the hospital, ensuring delivery of impact, changing the practice, going back to age-old, time-tested practices so that the overall cost envelope comes down. Thank you all for being part of this. Anusha, take it away and please wind up the session.
Thank you, Arun. Thanks, Dr. Paul, George, Ayush, Abhishek, for such a wonderful session. I'm sure I speak on behalf of the audience as well when I say that it was a truly an informative session and especially useful for all our healthcare startups in the room. Coming up next, we have a very exciting session on building a billion, affordable housing with 3D printing, being hosted by our knowledge partners, Habitat for Humanity. There will also be a masterclass on creating value for the end beneficiaries by Yunus Social Business. We also have clinicians from MSMF and an investment fellow from Ankur Capital waiting to network with the entrepreneurs in the networking lounges. So see you all again soon and hope you all are having a great day so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Anusha.